CIS-332 database and SQL. This is day 7. 2/8/17. So we worked through the first 2 sections, and here's just a little bit of another approach on looking at the external view, conceptual, how we see it, and how the data is actually stored. And the external can have different views. They could be looking at the same database, but different views of that database. Conceptually, or the word we like to use too, the logical view of the data, how we see it in terms of designing the database management system. And the database management system is able to make that connection to the physical layer and how the data is actually written out on the disk. And then we will talk about, after spring break, PHP programming that can make this transition here. Actually, they all come into one here. And it goes down into the physical view. So we can write code, so we can use something like a browser to view one of the views, or however many views. And that programming can make that connection in between. This a little bit of review. Top-down design, analysis, working with the client, or who needs the database or access to the data, or the client. Who are we going to design this for? And we design it, build initially. It's a lot more than just building the tables. It's actually a big part of the design. You're going to find out has to do with the relations and building relationships between, so maybe this one has a relation up there. Then we can start actually building it. Once we get through these 2 stages, the development, actually make the tables during the whole time. No matter what step we're at, we're always documenting. Put it into production, put it into use, and evaluate if it's working. If there needs to be changes, analyze, design the change, develop it, implement. Organization of the data, entities, objects of interest. And then the characteristics describe the entity, which we will be talking about as attributes. A certain class or group share common attributes. For example, we talked about an example, maybe a school database, and one entity is instructors, another entity are students, another entity are courses, and maybe another entity are what courses which students are taking. We start building relationships. A faculty member teaches a course. The course is being taken by a student. So we think of users can see different views of the database. We talked about doing that. One option is through a browser. And these different views fill into a conceptual model. How we see, for the example today, if we just talk about these tables, okay, and then somewhere that data is stored physically. Alright, so then we start talking about attributes. Attributes have constraints. For example, a constraint would be an attribute fits into a certain domain, a certain number of options. What state you live in could be selected from a list of the states of the United States. That would be a constraint. It has to be one of the states from the United States, what state you live in. Sounds pretty simple, but what type of attribute? Is it a numeric? Is it text? Is it video? You know, is it a picture? Is it a date? What type? And then there's limitations on all those. Those can have some kind of constraints. We describe it, give a description. It can hold a single value, or it might hold multi-value. More or less, there could be 2 or 3 values for that one attribute. It could be either this one, or this one. Single value, we can just assign a value to it. A composite is a little bit different. Composite, a good example would be like if you're giving somebody's entire name, first name, last name, and if you're storing those in one attribute, that could be a composite attribute. City, state, sometimes they store those together. That could be a composite. Alright. We talked about these things at the beginning of the class, reviewed the quiz, talked about practice 2, and we talked about continuing your work on the outline. We reviewed from the quiz. We used the internet. Some browser and some site, we go through the internet and we access maybe a web page which then communicates with some type of server to actually get the data. The user doesn't actually come in here. This communication is internal. Okay? So that's just a little review. We gave a library example. Entities, books, customers, checkout. Author could have their own table, and information from the author table be stored in the book table. Let's just say this is the book table. I think that was our example. Now what's interesting, you know, if you take an author out of this table, what happens to that author number up here? Referential integrity would cause that author to actually disappear, or that row in that table could disappear. We talk more about that later on. And could there be a requirement? If you're going to put a book in a table, does it have to have an author? If it does, the author has to come from this table. The last terms up here we talked about. Key restraint, we talked about those primary keys. Have to be unique. Have to be unique in the sense that they identify a record. Now these are two interesting ones. Is there null value? Is there no value for the field, or is the value missing? In some cases, somebody may not have a middle initial, so it's null. There is no middle initial. Or you just don't know the middle initial. The value is missing. There is a value for there, but you just don't know what it is. Okay? Like everybody has a birth date, but in some cases, a long time ago, you might not have the exact date. So that's just missing. There is a birth date, but you can't find it. Compared to there is no data for that slot.